So a young man calls up his mother, and he announced excitedly that he just met the woman of his dreams. And he wanted to impress her and get things started off right. I'm doing this for Phil's right. So he asks his mother what he should do. And the mother, she has an idea. She says, why don't you send her some flowers, and on the card, you invite her to your place for a home-cooked meal. None of that going out stuff. Everybody does that. Invite her home for a nice home-cooked meal. This should be special. And he thought this was a great idea, great strategy. So he arranged it. He sent the flowers and arranged the date for a week later. Well, then his mother calls up afterwards and says, so how did it go? How did it go? And he says, the evening was a complete disaster. And she said, why? Didn't she come over? He says, yeah, she came over, but she wouldn't cook dinner for me. Wah, 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 wah. All right, so he's got a rough path ahead of him there. As for us, we are here to continue with our Speaking of Love series. We're discussing the 5 love languages as proposed and written by Gary Chapman. Last time we touched on how love is really a type of communication. And communication can be tricky. When we say something, it usually makes sense to us, or we wouldn't have said it. Now, the one exception to that is politicians. Even politicians don't know what they're saying. But aside from that, when someone else hears our statement, they may hear something completely different. They might not catch everything that we said, or maybe they did catch it, but they take it with a different meaning or a different intent. You could have something like this happen. One day, 2 older gentlemen are chatting, and one was bragging about his new hearing aids and how great they are and how well they worked and how good he could hear with them. And his friend's very impressed and interested. And he says, well, what kind is it? And the other man, he takes a look at his watch and he says, well, it's 12:30. Sometimes miscommunication can lead to something funny like that, but often it leads to disagreements and strained relationships simply because one person did not understand what the other meant. Love is an especially difficult means of communication because it involves more than just an outward expression. It involves inward emotion. You can't disconnect yourself from the situation like you could if you were asking about the weather. The weather could be fair, the weather could be foul. But either way, it has no bearing on you as a person. It doesn't make you a better or worse person if the weather is not good. You could get mad at the forecaster, I suppose. We have all done that a little bit. But love, on the other hand, is as personal as it gets. When one communicates with love, there's a direct revelation and even judgment on the character of both the giver and the receiver. If the communication is taken badly, both of them could suffer. And this is why when we meet a stranger, it is often much easier to lead off talking about the weather than to communicate with love. And so we save our communications of love for those whom we feel safe in approaching, our friends, our families. Now, whether you're a Christian or not, those who we are close to should be the recipient of our love. That makes sense. But the Christian is not allowed to stop there. We are required to take things much further. Matthew 5, line 46, it says, "For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect." And so our target is much broader. Whether you're in a relationship or not, whether you have close friends and family or not, we are called to love people. And we're called to love them as we love ourselves, which namely is to love them in the way they want to be loved. enter in the 5 love languages, a means for us to understand the ways people want to be loved. Last time we took a little test to discern what our own love languages are, but we didn't discuss what the love languages actually mean. And that's part of our goal starting today, to go through each of the love languages and gain some insight as to what they mean for our ability to communicate love effectively. Now, there's many directions to approach the love languages. There's so many different ways you could talk about them and look at them. And I want you to keep one particular approach in mind. This is the approach I'm using for this week and for next week. I'm going to be talking about you loving someone else who has that love language. When I talk about physical touch, which is the first one I'm going to talk about, I'm not focusing on what you do if that's your love language. I'll be discussing how you connect to somebody else who uses physical touch. After these 2 weeks, then we'll spend more time discussing about what you do about your love language. But right now, our focus is on loving other people with that love language. Okay then, here we go. The 5 love languages are as follows. We'll just list them off here, and then we'll get into it. There's words of affirmation, there's quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. Today we're only going to talk about 2 of them, physical touch and quality time. So, the first is physical touch. Now let me start off by explaining what this love language is not. It is not simply being physically intimate with another person. I will not expound on that term. I can assume you know what I'm talking about. That type of physical intimacy can, and to some degree is, part of this love language. But that should not be one's primary or even secondary focus with this. This language is about acknowledging that somebody is a human being. Not a monster, not a piece of trash. Mark 1, line 40. And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling, said to him, "If you will, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him, and said to him, "I will, be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. Now, if you've been in church for any amount of time, it's pretty well known that for Jews to go around touching lepers was a big no-no. You didn't do that. Okay? There are many regulations about this in Leviticus, and it goes into much greater detail in the Talmud, which was the oral law at that time. Lepers were to be shunned, they were to be quarantined. And there were some exceptions to this. In some cases, there were lepers who could be part of society in ways. But for the most part, touching lepers made you unclean. They are unclean. It makes you unclean to touch them. Yet, by not touching them, you've made them inhuman. Or it makes them seem inhuman. They might as well be a poisonous plant or the barb of a stingray or something. You could give them the gift of food, and they may thank you for the food. You could speak uplifting words to them, and I don't know what they'd think of it. They'd probably think you were making light of their situation. You could use all the other love languages you want. But without touch, you'd still be merely telling them that ultimately they are less than human beings. Now, we don't often run into lepers today, so let's think about some more common examples. How do you know if you're dealing with someone with physical touch as a primary love language? Take notice of how they greet other people. Do they greet them with a hug? Do they come close to other people to talk? Do they give them a brief touch on the shoulder or on the arm or on the hand or something like that? Do they seem comfortable in close proximity with another person? If any of those things come together, then odds are that touch is one of their primary languages. Everyone needs some amount of touch. But it's going to vary depending on how strong of a love language touch is for them, as well as your relationship to the person. That being said, even total strangers can benefit from touch. For all you know, that person that you've met might feel like a modern-day leper. Even though they're completely healthy physically, no problems like that, they may look completely normal. But inside, they're concealing a sinful nature that has made them feel untouchable, unworthy of human contact. Maybe whatever it is not their fault. Maybe something was done to them that has damaged their self-worth so much that they can't bring themselves to let another person touch them. Just the slightest touch on the arm when saying hello could be all it takes to break open that cage and let them get started on that road to healing. Just like the leper that Jesus touched, we need people to know that God loves them and is willing to reach out to them, even when everyone else is turning away from them. Then again, your attempt to touch the stranger could get you slugged. So, there is always that. You need to evaluate each situation as it comes. We can discuss all sorts of stuff here, but real life is much more complicated than that. So, in any situation, you're going to need to take time and evaluate it. But understand, touch can be extremely, extremely powerful, depending on what someone is feeling inside. They may be feeling very disconnected with others. For those who are in dating or married relationships, it's of great value to know if your significant other has touch as a primary love language, especially if it's on the bottom of your list. Sarah and I, we don't have a king-size bed, and we don't have a queen-size bed. We have a full-size bed, because we like to cuddle. So that's... We love to cuddle. Now, I know that there are couples who would opt for the California king. Oh, give me the biggest bed possible. And they want to be as far apart as humanly possible. Give me my own space. And that's perfectly fine. Either way, if both of them have physical touch at the bottom of their list, that's great. They're probably doing exactly what each one wants. The problem comes is if one's at the top and one's at the bottom. If that's what you end up with, then you could have some serious strife there. You're going to leave one person feeling undesired and unwanted, sort of like a leper, while the other person is feeling smothered and with these constant demands for attention, for that physical contact. Stay away from me. I don't want to cuddle. I don't want to cuddle. Give me my space. Those difficulties can be overcome. They're not insurmountable, but only if you recognize that they're there. Once you recognize them, and that's one of the purposes of going through this, is it's not going to give you all the answers to every situation, but if you know that they're there, if you know that these different love languages exist, then you can start to see them in people. And especially in a relationship, you can start to make adjustments. Now, all too often, the adjustments could seem one-sided, and that can get you in trouble. One person is asked to adjust. You need to change for me. Or maybe one person does adjust. One person adjusts and then expects the other person to adjust, and then they never do. When both people are willing to meet the other with the right love language and love as they would have themselves loved, then that relationship can be much stronger and much happier. Okay. Now we're going to move on to a love language that pairs up pretty well with physical touch, and that's quality time. Both of these love languages involve being in close proximity with somebody, so they can work out well, but they can also be very different. You can spend an evening working on projects together and never touch at all, but you are spending quality time together. We have a biblical example for this, Luke 10, line 38. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Now, this story doesn't get a lot of attention, I don't think. But in some ways, it's quite similar to the prodigal son. We often relate to the older brother and the prodigal son, typically, right? You read about that one, and you place yourself in the position of the good son who stayed at home and did the work of the father, while the younger one goes off and they're irresponsible and so forth. Now, in the story of Martha and Mary, I think it's that quite a few people want to relate to poor Martha, and you feel bad for Martha. She's slaving away to make sure that their guest is well taken care of, while lazy Mary is just sitting there hanging out with Jesus. And to top it all off, to pour salt in the wound, Martha is the one who gets told that she's wrong. Man, that's rough. How frustrating. So Jesus' point in that story is that there's always going to be busy work. There's always going to be things that need to get done, food to be made, dishes to clean, work to do. And because those things are always going to be there, you can easily lose your entire life to busy work. It's just, you get in the groove and you get caught up in it and everything passes you by. And the very important things can pass you by. And what are those important things? Well, in this particular case, Jesus was the number one, and people in general for number two. The work would always be there, but the opportunity to literally sit at Jesus' feet and listen to his teaching would not always be there. Jesus did not want to waste even a single moment. He wanted to spend quality time with both Martha and Mary. Now let's focus on Mary for a bit. She sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teachings. Her attentions were focused on him. They were sharing the experience together. They were growing together, gaining an understanding of each other together. And that is what quality time is all about. It's time that accomplishes something together. But it's not about the thing being accomplished. That doesn't matter, honestly. That could be anything. It could be as simple as telling each other about your day, or as complicated as creating a budget together or doing home repairs. The point is, you spent time together in such a way that you end up with a stronger relationship. You understand each other better. You feel more comfortable together. And you both have a sense of accomplishment in what you've done together. So how do you know if quality time is somebody's primary love language? Well, typically this one's not too hard. This is the person who keeps inviting you over for stuff or asking if you can meet up. They plan events just so you can attend them. And they're more likely to attend an event just to spend time with people, even if they don't care for the event itself. So how do you show love to somebody like that? Easy, spend time with them, right? Spend time with them. It's not that easy. Seems like it should be easy, but it's not that easy. Because you can't just show up. You have to engage with the person in some way. Getting sucked into a phone or a tablet while the other person's sitting next to you doesn't count. Or just being in the same room doesn't count. There needs to be interaction and a sense of accomplishment at the end of it. You don't necessarily have to build a building sort of accomplishment. You don't have to do that. But even just an accomplishment like, oh, hey, we got to know each other better. Or something like that. Or we built a stronger relationship. As long as you come away with something. And this is where other variables are going to come into play. There's a lot more than just love languages going on here. If you're an introvert or an extrovert, that's going to be a big deal here. Like how well you can do that. How well you can express yourself to another person, being an introvert or an extrovert. If you're just not very good at expressing yourself, it can be hard to do that quality time thing. If you want to grow relationships with quality time people, Those are skills you're going to need to work on. You're going to need to. Now, I said that physical touch people and quality time people, they can pair pretty nicely. And they both like to be around others for the most part, so there's ample opportunity to communicate love. The other love languages can have a little bit of trouble with this one. You see, like words of affirmation and giving gifts, those can seem a little bit abrupt and distant. I mean, you can just mail those. You don't ever have to see the person to send them a gift, or you can send a text message to somebody to give them words of affirmation. And if that's your love language, that's what you think people want, then you think you're doing great. I'll text them a message every day to tell them how great they are, and that'll build them up. Well, if they're a quality time person, it's not going to do them any good at all, because they're just going to think that you're being distant from them. Why doesn't that person ever want to come see me? They just keep texting me. What's with that? Now, one that can be even more problematic is service. If you're a service person trying to connect to a quality time person, and here's why, all right? If you show love by doing service, by definition, you want to do something for someone. I'm doing a service for someone. If you're a quality time person, you want to do something with someone. For someone and with someone. This can be a big deal. You got your work cut out for you here. This is what we read in the case of Martha and Mary with Jesus. Martha is using service to show love. She's cleaning the dishes. She's making the food. She's doing all the preparations. I want to, this is the way I show love to Jesus. I want him to feel loved and welcome. I'm doing service for him. She wanted to do something for Jesus. He wanted to do something with her. If you show love by doing service, you need to be very, very aware of this. You need to find a way to curb the desire to do your own thing and find some way to do that with the other person, not just for them. You might think you're being super nice by taking care of that person, by doing the things on your own, but in the end, you'll leave them feeling alone and probably like you don't trust them to do things, or you don't think that they're capable of doing things. That's why it's important to remember these concepts in relationships. Not, like I said, not just intimate relationships, but with all relationships. This comes into play. You might think you're doing something great and you're building that relationship up when in fact you're doing more damage and you're pushing the other person farther away from you. Okay, so I think we've covered enough for today. We covered physical touch, we covered quality time. Next week we're going to look at loving people whose languages are service and words of affirmation and gifts. And we're going to continue to learn how we can accomplish loving others as they want to be loved. Amen.